Hello, this is HG Tudor, and today I'm going to discuss for you how soon will it be before I am Hoover free. This, of course, is the $64 million question. You've worked out that an individual is a narcissist. You've imposed some form of no-contact regime, and I use the phrase some form because the totality of your no-contact regime is a fundamental and germane aspect of this discussion, something that I will return to in due course. So you have imposed this no-contact regime, having worked out that you've been ensnared by a narcissist, and invariably you want to know, will I now be left alone? Will I not get any Hoovers at all? Or if I do, when will they come? And more importantly, how soon will it be before the Hoovers stop and I am left alone? Will it be a week, a month, 6 months, a year? The first thing to consider is what governs whether a Hoover will occur. There are two things. First, is there a Hoover trigger? And the second, are the Hoover execution criteria met? Please understand that the vast majority of narcissists being lesser and mid-range, they do not sit down and think, shall I Hoover my ex today? Shall I contact her for the purposes of gaining fuel? They don't think that way. What they do is act instinctively. Those narcissists will think they're contacting you because there is an outstanding issue with regard to the repayment of some money. They will contact you because they want to see the children. They'll contact you because they want to apologise, or at least provide some false contrition. They do not sit there and think, I know, I'm going to embark now on a campaign to get her back, and I'm going to Hoover her repeatedly. The narcissist does not sit there and think, I know, I'm going to teach him a lesson for what he's done to me, and I'm now going to sit outside his house in the car to intimidate him, send him horrible things through the post, etc., etc. Most narcissists operate through instinct and therefore will not think in that calculated manner. With the Hoover trigger, this is where you enter the narcissist spheres of influence. There are 6 of those. So, for example, if you telephone the narcissist, you enter his sphere of influence, you cause a Hoover trigger. You go and see him, you've caused a Hoover trigger. You walk past where he works, and he sees you, you've caused a Hoover trigger. You happen to be in the same bar as she is, she sees you, there's a Hoover trigger. If the narcissist is reminded of you, or thinks about you, there is just an intrusive thought where you pop into the narcissist's mind, that is a Hoover trigger. Accordingly, all of those items being Hoover triggers raise the potential for a Hoover. If there is a Hoover trigger, this does not mean that a Hoover will automatically follow. Now, if you impose a solid and robust no-contact regime, so you are not telephoning the narcissist, messaging the narcissist, going around to see him or her, driving past where they live, you're staying well away, you will stay out of the first 5 spheres of influence. However, you cannot guarantee there will not be a Hoover trigger. Why? Because the narcissist might just be reminded of you, looking at a book or a film, or somebody mentions your name to the narcissist, or they just happen to think about you. And thus, there is always a risk of a Hoover trigger, which then means there is always a risk of a Hoover. But note, it's a risk, not a certainty. So, if a Hoover trigger takes place, the next question is, are the Hoover execution criteria achieved? Are they met? Again, the narcissist does not sit down and evaluate all of these factors and then decide, yes, I will now Hoover. Instead, I describe these various factors so you understand what are the factors which are relevant and applicable to whether you will be more likely or less likely to be Hoovered. Why? So you can do something about it. So, what are some of these Hoover execution criteria? Well, some of them are, what school of narcissist are you dealing with? Are you with a new partner? Have you wounded the narcissist? And if you did, how extensive was that wounding, and how recent or long ago was that? Has there been some form of exposure? What was your fuel like? What was your position in the fuel matrix? How easy is it or difficult to hoover you? What means of hoovering are available to the narcissist? And many other factors. Some of these factors push the hoover bar higher, meaning it's less likely you'll be hoovered. Some of them bring it down, meaning it's more likely you'll be hoovered. And therefore, all of these factors are looked at in aggregate to establish a risk, whether you're almost guaranteed to be hoovered or whether it's highly unlikely that you will be. Now, there are hundreds of different ways that we can hoover you, but there are just 4 hoover carriers. And that's the carrier, the means of the hoover taking place. And they are direct physical, we come to see you in person and speak to you face to face. Indirect physical, we do the drive-by past your house. We hover outside where you work. We hang around in a bar that we know that you frequent. Hoover by proxy. Friends, colleagues, family are sent on our behalf to talk about us, find information about you. And electronic hoovers, telephoning us, messaging us, texting us. Those are the 4 methods. Each of those methods all have certain advantages and disadvantages inherent in them. So, for example, let's take direct physical. What are the upsides of that? Well, we gain a massive amount of fuel if you respond with fuel to us from a direct physical hoover. This is because, when you are in our presence, you give us the largest amount of fuel. What are the downsides? The downside is you're more likely to wound us. If you have been abused by us and if you've worked out what we are, you're more likely to avoid us if you see us walking towards you than if we send you a text message. The text message is at arm's length, and in those circumstances, you're more likely to respond to it feeling safer than if you saw us approaching. Moreover, if you do choose to ignore us when we attempt a direct physical hoover, the consequence of that is there is massive wounding. Contrast this, for example, with an electronic hoover by text. What's the upside there? Well, we're less likely to be wounded, as I've just explained, and if you do wound us, the wounding is not severe, it's only slight. The other upside of it is it's really easy to do. We can send out a text to you and indeed many other appliances just like that. The downside is we don't get much fuel because it's the written word. Of course, the downside with the direct physical hoover is that it takes a lot of effort. It might be that we have to actually try and find you. You might be some distance away, which involves travelling, and we may not actually be able to get to you. For all our brilliance, we've not yet mastered the art of walking through doors and walls. So with a hoover, there are 3 outcomes that can occur. The first is it's executed and succeeds. Thus, we come to see you, you speak, you give us fuel. You stand there and cry, you give us fuel. You wave your arms around, agitated, and frown and glare at us, you've given us fuel. An executed but failed hoover. We approach you, so we've got next to you, you walk away and ignore us. The hoover failed. We send a text message, it goes through, we know you've read it, there's no response. And then there is the unexecuted hoover. And that is where you never know that it even happened. So, you've moved house, we come to find you, we go to your old house, you're not there. You don't know we've done this, the hoover is unexecuted. And the idea, of course, with you or no contact regime is to ensure that all, or if not all, as many as possible of the hoovers are unexecuted. Why? 1, you don't know about it. 2, therefore there is no downside for you. 3, you do not provide fuel. 4, it wounds us and thus pushes the hoover bar higher. Consequently, in terms of how soon will it be before I'm hoover free, it is essentially down to you. The greater the number of hoover triggers there are, the more likely it is you'll be hoovered. If somebody shoots a bullet at you once, there's less than a chance that that bullet will hit you. If somebody shoots at you 100 times, a bullet's going to hit you at some point. Therefore, if you are causing lots of hoover triggers, it follows that it's likely that more hoovers will come, assuming the criteria are met. If the only risk is that the narcissist is going to think about you periodically, then the likelihood of a Hoover occurring is far less. Again, with the Hoover execution criteria, if you have taken appropriate steps to ensure that your no contact is as robust as possible, and this coincides with particular timing, the likelihood of you being hoovered can be reduced to nearly zero. Of course, this will not last for reasons which I'll explain in due course. But for example, if you have moved house, changed your telephone number, come off social media, explain to friends and family that they are not to pass on details to the narcissist should he come knocking, you stay away from known associates, friends, family, colleagues of the narcissist, and the narcissist is with a new intimate partner primary source in a golden period, you're going to be left alone. Why? All of those factors mean that if there is a Hoover trigger, and the narcissist may still be reminded about you, point to it being pointless, him trying to Hoover you, because all of the criteria are such that they push the Hoover bar so high the criteria cannot be met, therefore no Hoover happens. People will ask, will a narcissist go to the ends of the earth to try and track me down? Well, and this track me down, Hoover me. That depends. A greater narcissist will. If a greater narcissist wants to find you, you will be found. Nobody can vanish forever. The good news is that greater narcissists, we are very rare, and the chances of you being ensnared by one are very low indeed. Most of you will have been ensnared, despite what you think, by lesser and mid-range narcissists. A greater will track you down, but even then, a greater will ultimately have other fish to fry, and even if you have been ensnared by a narcissist, the greater may have a nibble at you and leave matters with somebody else to try and track you down, and then focus on other matters. A mid-range narcissist is highly unlikely to try and track you down. Their energy levels don't support it, and ultimately it's far easier for them to go elsewhere than pursue you when it is very difficult to find out where you are. As for a lesser, they're just not going to do it. They don't have the energy, the resources, the desire to track you down, where it is very difficult to do so, and instead it's far easier for them to go and get an alternative target instead. What about then if you've exposed the narcissist massively to lots of people in terms of the awful way that he's behaved, or even that you've worked out this person is a narcissist and you've told lots of people? Does that mean no Hoovers? Many people often write, oh, I've exposed the narcissist HG to everybody. There's no way he will Hoover me ever again. Wrong. That exposure will certainly drive the Hoover bar high, but it does not mean that you are now immune from being hoovered. The effect of that exposure will fade over time. Moreover, it is but one criterion amongst several criteria. If the other criteria bring the Hoover bar down, the fact that you've exposed that narcissist is not going to prevent you from being hoovered. So, let's say you've exposed the narcissist to many people. That in turn has caused significant wounding. That drives the Hoover bar up. Thus, as a starting point, far less likely you'll be hoovered. However, your no-contact regime is rubbish. The arrogance of your emotional thinking has made you think, I've exposed him, I'm going to be left alone, so I don't need to change my life in any way to avoid this person. You're still on social media. You haven't changed your telephone number. You live around the corner from the narcissist. You're not with anybody new. You don't have a restraining order against the narcissist. The narcissist, you actually escaped from him. And in the circumstances, he does not have a primary source waiting in the wings. His fuel needs, his memory of how good your fuel was, and also the fact that you have done him a dark deed, means, combined with all of the other factors, it's likely that you will be hoovered. And it may well be that you will be hoovered malignly. He may not wish to draw you back into his fuel matrix as a primary source, but he will want to punish you, driven by the exposure that you have caused. Therefore, simply saying, I've exposed the narcissist, therefore I will not be hoovered, is not only wrong, it only looks at part of the picture. One has to have an appreciation of a variety of factors. Of course, If you have exposed the narcissist and you've moved house, you've come off social media, you've changed your email address, you've got a restraining order in place, you have changed your telephone number, you've locked matters down with friends and family, the likelihood of you then being hoovered is far, far less likely. Because, one, the narcissist is unable to find you, and, barring a greater, is unlikely to want to try and track you down because it's just too much hard work, is using up too much of their precious fuel, and therefore, much as it will infuriate the narcissist is forced to go and hunt elsewhere, and you will largely be left alone. What you have to understand, however, is that the Hoover execution criteria are fluid in nature. Some are fixed, but many are fluid. So, for example, if you cause massive wounding to the narcissist, this drives the Hoover bar higher. However, over time it fades. Therefore, after a month, the impact of that wounding is not as great. After 6 months, it will be non-existent. And therefore, the raising the Hoover bar higher element of the wounding is lost. And so if you have other criteria which bring the Hoover bar down or keep it down low, the risk of being hoovered is higher. The fuel needs of the narcissist alter. If the narcissist is being well fueled elsewhere, the need to get fuel from you becomes less necessary. Of course, if the narcissist is struggling for fuel and you are comparatively easy to approach, to hoover, the fuel needs will drive them to you more than somebody else. And those fuel needs, of course, fluctuate. The constitution of the fuel matrix changes. People drift in and out of it. New people are recruited and ensnared. People are placed on the shelf. Some are disengaged from. Some escape. And therefore, the narcissist's fuel matrix and how it is formulated impacts upon how your criteria are established. And of course, this is one of the random elements. Alongside with the level of fuel that the narcissist has, you will not know these factors. And therefore, that is why, on some occasions, you will be left alone, and others you won't, and you won't necessarily realise why it is. You think that you know the factors that are driving it. You don't know all of the factors. Or you at least know what the factor is, but you do not know at what level it is. You know that fuel is a factor. The fuel needs and the fuel requirements and the current fuel level of the narcissist is a factor. But you don't necessarily know whether that fuel is currently low or high. The ease of contact is fluid as well. People impose no contact. They may come off social media for 2 months, then go back on it. So they've opened up a new conduit. It might be that their telephone number has been changed, but then that new number leaks out into the firmament, and it might find its way to the narcissist, inadvertently or deliberately. It might be that you stay away from a particular place that the narcissist went to. You don't go to the gym for a period of time. You don't go to a particular shopping mall. You don't go to a particular bar. And then you decide to go. So the Hoover execution criteria have fluidity. And that means that the Hoover bar goes up and down in accordance with those criteria, how many are applicable, to what extent they're applicable, and therefore the risk also goes up and goes down. So you have to consider that all of these factors are dealt with in aggregate. Some of them you'll know about, some of them you won't know about, some that you'll know that the factor exists, but you won't know the level of applicability that it necessarily has. What you have to deal with is what you know about. Look to your own defences, as I repeatedly explain. Make that no contact robust. Do not suffer the excuses that are churned out by your emotional thinking of, oh, he won't hoover me again after what I did to him. Wrong. That's emotional thinking. Oh, I wounded him massively. I'll be left well alone. Wrong. He's frightened of me. I'll kick his ass if he comes near. Wrong. Focus on a total no contact. Move house if you're able to do so, and give serious consideration to that. Ensure address details are kept quiet. Do not hand them out willy-nilly. If the narcissist does turn up at your door, you don't speak to the narcissist, you don't answer the narcissist, you don't talk through the window or letterbox to them. You wait and they will eventually go away, and if they don't, you call the police after a few minutes and have them removed. Block with the telephone number. Even better, change your telephone number. Put in place gateways where, for example, you have a work number that can't be changed. All of these methods are set out in my book, No Contact, to help you with all of this. If you impose a robust and firm no contact regime, what this means is the likelihood of a Hoover trigger is reduced to the lowest level, meaning just the sixth sphere of influence, when the narcissist is reminded of you or thinks about you, and moreover, certain Hoover execution criteria will not apply, and those that do apply, in all likelihood, you are pushing the Hoover bar as high as you possibly can, meaning the risk of a Hoover is reduced. Do all of that, do it successfully, apply what I direct you to do, and do it properly, then what you will find is that over time, the Hoovers will become less and less. You cannot extinguish them totally. That only happens when you're dead or we're dead. But you can reduce the risk to the lowest level so that there might be the intermittent nibble. And if you then don't react, and you will not react because your emotional thinking has been reduced to a very low level as a consequence of this enforced period of no contact, when you are ambushed by a Hoover, and sometimes they come out of left field, the narcissist turns up at a concert that you attended and you had no idea that they would be there, because your emotional thinking is a lot lower because you've had a sustained period of no contact, you will ignore the narcissist. You ignoring the narcissist then wounds the narcissist and means that the next time there's a Hoover trigger, all else being equal, it's less likely you'll be hoovered. Why? Because there has been recent wounding, and that is an applicable criteria of the Hoover execution criteria. You can never be guaranteed to be Hoover free from a narcissist unless you die or the narcissist dies. But that stated, impose a rigid and robust no contact regime, the Hoovers will become less and less. And when they do, you'll be able to resist them if they get through, or they will be unexecuted, and it will then mean that you will be left alone for a period of time thereafter, until such time as the criteria are met again, because, for example, circumstances alter, the effect of wounding has faded away. So, it is not a case of saying that you can be Hoover free within a specified period of time, but what you can do is very quickly reduce the risk to very low by the imposition of this rigid and robust no contact regime. It is in your hands. Guard against the emotional thinking which tells you, I can't move house, or I can't shift job, or he won't Hoover me because he's frightened of me, or she's not going to do anything after how I exposed it to everybody. Those are instances of emotional thinking. Close down every single conduit, lock it down, seal it, brick the walls up. And therefore, when the Hoovers are attempted, the majority will not get through, which makes it easier for you to resist them. And over time, they will become less and less and less. And in effect, you become, essentially, almost Hoover free.